In today's installment of the Lion Switch Analysis series, I'll be discussing each of the characters' particular brand of leadership and why their differences are so important.
Whoosh. It's us.
In fiction, whenever two characters have a similar skill or occupy a similar place in the story's narrative, the fanbase always likes to compare the two and try to determine who is the best at the thing. There's nothing wrong with this. After all, realistically, someone does have to be the best at some point. However, some situations are much more nuanced, and determining who the best is may no longer be relevant. The Lion Switch is one such situation that I think fits into the latter category. We have several different characters who are all capable of sharing the same space, and there are multiple schools of thought as to who should be the ultimate leader or the pilot of the Black Lion. Most of these arguments come from the who is the best way of thinking. I prefer to think of it this way. All of these characters have the potential to be amazing leaders, just not the same kind of leaders. One day, the fight against Zarkon will be over, but the universe will always need the Paladins of Voltron. After 10,000 years of oppression, many of the civilizations will need to be rebuilt, and the Galra Empire itself will need guidance and leadership. Team Voltron's experiences fighting in the war and recruiting different planets to their coalition are laying the groundwork for the role they will play once the fight is over. Now I'm going to break down each of the characters' leadership style, and how I think that affects what lion they pilot. Elora's method of leadership branches off into two separate yet very similar styles. The first one is a product of her upbringing. Elora is royalty and was most likely raised to be a leader from her childhood. This first style is regal and calm, listening to what others have to say and accepting their contributions. This is Elora as the Princess of Altea. Then she was thrust into the middle of a war at a young age, which is when her second leadership style came into its own. I like to think of it as Elora the General or Field Marshal. Elora the General is more stern and commanding, almost to the point of being harsh. We see this duality reflected in the clothing she wears. As a princess, she wears a dress and her hair is down. A prime example of her leadership as a princess is when she tells the Paladins which lion they will pilot. We first see her as a general in episode 1 after she has spoken to her father's AI. Here, she has put away her regal command and is much more militaristic in both appearance and bearing. Her command and self-assurance in this scene is a stark contrast to her self-doubt only moments before. This brings us to the lions. If Elora is capable of such command, if she so effortlessly meets all the requirements to be the Black Paladin, then why wasn't she? I think this comes down to what I said a few moments ago. Everything that is currently happening in the show is setting up the roles everyone will play after the war is over. Once the threat is eliminated, the universe at large will not need General Elora as much as it needs Princess Elora, because as princess, she is a uniter and a diplomat. She will bring together the various races throughout the galaxy into a strong alliance. If she were to become the pilot of the Black Lion, then she would be enforcing her position as a military leader rather than her position as a diplomatic peacekeeper. On to Keith. Thus far, Keith doesn't seem to have a well-defined leadership style. In seasons 1 and 2, he was often separate from the team, off on some sort of side quest that the others usually would try to talk him out of. As a leader, Keith is not collaborative. He has a my way or the highway approach that frustrates his teammates and gets them all into a lot of hot water in season 3. I think that his particular brand of leadership is actually his attempt to mimic Shiro. As we see in the Blade of Marmora episode, Keith's perception of Shiro is somewhat warped. The Shiro that is projected by Keith's subconscious has more in common with Keith's leadership than with the real Shiro's. In the fall of the Castle of the Lions, we see that Shiro believes that a team only works when everyone wants to be a part of it, and that he recognizes the skills that each member brings to the table. The hologram Shiro in Blade of Marmora seems to outright dismiss Keith's needs and almost loses his temper, much like Keith would do if their positions were reversed. This isn't to say that Keith has no potential as a leader, quite the opposite in fact. I think him being the Black Paladin is about bringing him into the group and exposing his flaws and insecurities so that they can be dealt with. Now that the success or failure of their mission rests much more squarely on his shoulders than it did before, this means he will need to consider the consequences of his actions before he makes a decision. Once he mellows, I can see him being the military leader that complements Elora's position as diplomat. In my next video, I'll discuss how I think this will affect his character arc. Unlike with Elora, it is a little difficult to theorize on what Keith will do once the war is over. Perhaps he will become a member of the Blade of Marmora? Colavan's successor, even. You know, that actually makes a lot of sense. For Shiro, his style of leadership is softer and more emotional than Keith and Elora's. Their stake in the fight is defeating evil. His is defending the powerless. They focus on the mission, he focuses on the people, never losing sight of the individual. People follow him not necessarily because of his rank or status, but rather because he inspires them. You know how he's called the champion? It isn't just because he won all those fights in the arena. It's because a champion is also a person who fights or argues for a cause or on behalf of someone else, which is actually very similar to the definition of paladin. A running theme that we've seen is that people follow Shiro because he gives them hope, much like Voltron itself brings hope. After the war, I can see him as a driving force for peace, and if Elora does become the leader of a new alliance, I can see Shiro being the one to help her run it. I'm sorry I wasn't able to get to Lance in this video, but I've got a lot to say about him and his place on Team Voltron, and I don't want this video to get too long. In the next installment of this series, I'm going to go into more depth about each character's arc and how that affects line placement. As always, thank you for watching, and don't forget to let us know your thoughts in the comments. See you next time!